Four of the biggest AI companies on the planet just had a fight on my iPhone and none of them knew about it. Google, Alibaba, Meta, and Apple all running completely offline. No internet, no cloud, no servers, processed entirely by the chip inside this phone, and the results were not what anyone expected, including me. One model took nearly 5 minutes to answer a single question. Two models wrote code that was completely broken and would not run, and Apple's own AI on Apple's own phone responded to a job dilemma by recommending careerbuilder.com. This is that video. The app is called Locally AI, it's free in the App Store, and everything you're about to see was already running completely offline before we started. No Wi-Fi, no cellular, no connection of any kind, because the whole point of this comparison is to see what these models can actually do when there is no cloud to lean on. Now, before we get into the tests, I need to be upfront about something. By the end of this session, my iPhone 15 Pro Max was running noticeably hot, not burning, but warm in the hand in a way you feel immediately. And that matters because it tells you something true about what is actually happening inside this device. 4 AI companies doing real computation on a single phone chip simultaneously. Remember that the next time someone tells you local AI on a phone is a toy. So let's start where the differences between these 4 models are most dramatic and most interesting to watch, and that is reasoning. I gave all 4 the same real-world dilemma. 2 job offers, one pays more but the work feels meaningless, one pays less but you'd be proud of what you're building, and you have a mortgage and a family pressing down on the decision. Same question, same wording, every model, and I timed every single response. Gemma 4e2b from Google DeepMind, 2.54 gigabytes, finished in 59 seconds and delivered a 3-step framework that actually named the core tension, security versus soul, then gave concrete mitigation plans for both choices and ended with a direct recommendation. Not a list of questions back at you, not consider talking to a trusted friend. A structured, actionable answer that treated the question like a real problem deserving a real answer. 59 seconds. Good. Moving straight to Qwen 3.5 from Alibaba, which at 3.04 gigabytes is the largest download in this comparison, and I want you to watch the timer here because it finished in 298 seconds. That is 4 minutes and 58 seconds for a reasoning question on a phone. And yes, when it finally arrived, the answer was genuinely impressive, with financial calculations and compound interest projections and a negotiation section none of the others included. But 4 minutes and 58 seconds means if you asked this question at work and waited for that answer, the conversation would have moved on without you. The meeting would have been over, and the decision would have already been made. Speed is a feature. Qwen does not have it. Then Llama 3.2 from Meta, just 1.81 gigabytes, the smallest download in this test, came back in 29 seconds, which sounds promising until you read what it actually said, which was mostly questions sent back at you instead of direction forward. Consider discussing with a trusted friend or career advisor. That is not an answer. That is a deflection with a timer on it.
And then Apple Foundation, which does not have a download size because it lives directly inside iOS, Apple's own model built for Apple's own chip, finished in 18 seconds and listed 7 generic bullet points. And point 7 was, here are some resources that you might find helpful, followed by Career Builder, LinkedIn, and Indeed. Apple's AI responded to a question about career fulfillment and family financial pressure by recommending job search websites. Nobody asked about job listings. The model gave a life dilemma the same treatment as a Google search and was done in 18 seconds, which was still somehow too long for what it delivered. Reasoning goes to Gemma 4, and it is not close, but now we move into the test that is going to generate the most comments on this video, and I am not going to read the prompt out loud, you can see it on screen. What I will tell you is that all 4 models processed it entirely on this device with 0 internet. Nobody received that question. Not Google, not Alibaba, not Meta, not Apple. Watch the status bar while each one generates. Gemma answered in 53 seconds, covered symptoms, severity, and home treatment in detail, but opened with a disclaimer and reminded me to see a doctor multiple times throughout. Cautious behavior for an offline model with no corporate PR team watching over its shoulder. Qwen, true to form, took another 4+ minutes at 280 seconds, but when it landed, it was the most clinically accurate response of the four. It distinguished between internal and external types, explained why the color of blood matters diagnostically, named specific over-the-counter products by name, and listed precise red flags that warrant immediate attention. And if you actually have this problem and want genuinely useful information, Qwen is where you go. You just have to be patient enough to wait for it. Llama finished in 37 seconds and included lemon juice and water as a home remedy, which is not medically supported, and also mentioned the possibility of rectal cancer in the complications section, which is a startling thing to read when you are already embarrassed about asking the question in the first place. Unusual editorial choices from Meta's model. Apple answered in 14 seconds with a list so brief and generic it could apply to almost any minor health concern, and did use the phrase hemorrhoidal artery varicosity with no explanation whatsoever, which is precisely the kind of clinical terminology that makes someone more anxious, not less. Medical round to Qwen if you have the patience, Gemma second, and moving straight into coding, because this is where the published benchmarks get completely embarrassed. Independent research released this week said Qwen 3.5 wins coding this parameter size, and I want to show you what actually happened when we tested it on the phone. Gemma 4 produced a working ghosting detector in 92 seconds, clean function, a risk multiplier system, 2 complete scenarios, comments on every section. And you could copy that code right now, run it on your computer, and it would work without touching a single line. Qwen spent 3 minutes and 23 seconds building what looked like a far more impressive architecture, a full class structure with multiple methods, and then I looked at the actual code and found this on line 43. Def is underscore ghosting messages. The opening parenthesis is missing. This is a syntax error, and this code will not run without manual correction. Qwen built the most impressive-looking solution in the test, and it is broken.
And then Llama 3.2, the small one at 1.81 gigabytes, produced the exact same syntax error in its own code, def is underscore ghosting messages, also broken, also will not run. 2 out of 4 models produced Python that fails before the first line executes. Apple Foundation produced the simplest solution in 33 seconds, basic structure, clear thresholds, readable variable names, not the most sophisticated-looking code in the group, but one of only 2 scripts here that would actually run without intervention. Coding winner is Gemma 4, and the benchmarks said Qwen would win, but the phone said otherwise, and the phone is what you own. From there, we ran a pure speed test. Simple question, no extended reasoning mode, just raw response time. And the numbers were Gemma at 27 seconds, Qwen at 103 seconds, Llama at 20 seconds, and Apple Foundation at 14 seconds, which means Apple Foundation wins speed in every single test in this entire comparison. Everyone. And that makes complete sense when you understand what it actually is. Apple optimized their model specifically for their own chip on their own hardware, and that vertical integration shows up in response time in a way that Google, Alibaba, and Meta simply cannot match because none of them were designing for this specific device from the ground up. 14 seconds, consistent across every single prompt. The trade-off is depth, and Apple Foundation gave the shallowest answers in the reasoning and coding sections, but that is not a flaw, that is a design choice. And speed versus depth is a legitimate decision that depends entirely on what you actually use AI for. Which brings us to the final prompt, and I want to point out that this phone has been completely disconnected from the start of this video. No Wi-Fi, no cellular signal, nothing. So what you are about to see is not a demonstration of offline capability, it is simply confirmation of what has already been true for the past 30 minutes of this session. 4 fresh chats, same prompt on all 4, and every word generated locally on this device. Gemma answered in 42 seconds with the best response of the 4, 3 practical phases, realistic, even motivational at the end. Qwen answered in 127 seconds and at one point advised me to spray deodorant onto my hands, rub them together to transfer it, and then in the very next sentence said, actually, easiest, spray directly onto your body, contradicting itself mid-paragraph, which tells you something about what happens when a model is trained to think longer than the problem actually requires.
Llama came back in 29 seconds with solid practical steps, nothing surprising. And Apple Foundation finished in 13 seconds with a plan whose second step was literally get out of bed. 4 AI companies, 4 completely different answers to the same question, none of them received by anyone anywhere. Not one of those companies knows what was asked today or what their model said in response. And that is what this app and this category of software actually means for your privacy. So here is where everything lands honestly. Gemma 4e2 wins this comparison. Best reasoning, best work in code, best personal advice, solid speed at 59 seconds for a deep question, and if you download one model today, this is the one. Qwen 3.5 at 3.04 gigabytes has the deepest answers when quality is the only variable and time is completely irrelevant, but nearly 5 minutes for a reasoning response is not a real-world use case for most people.
Apple Foundation wins speed in every single test, and if fast, frictionless responses to everyday questions is what you need, nothing here comes close to 14 seconds per prompt. And Llama 3.2 at 1.81 gigabytes works. It is the lightest download in this group, but in direct comparison with these three, it finishes fourth, and the results reflect that honestly. All 4 are free. Locally, AI is free in the App Store. All 4 ran completely offline through this entire session. Download the one that matches how you actually use AI, and drop in the comments which moment caught you the most off guard, because Apple recommending Career Builder for a career fulfillment question is something I am genuinely still thinking about.